You're joking, aren't you? It's the Teesside Chef.
The perfect crispy falafel recipe made even better by one magical ingredient that led to accusations that I am a massive Tory. But more on that later in the video. Uncooked chickpeas make the best falafel, so you will need dried chickpeas. Add a teaspoon of baking soda per 500 grams of dried chickpeas. Cover with plenty of water and soak overnight before making this recipe. And even though I think we should all try and live in the moment a little bit more, I recommend a little forward thinking with this falafel endeavour. And as you awaken the next day following yet another restless night courtesy of excessive screen time before bed, your chickpeas will have doubled in weight and 500 grams of your now plump legume can be deposited in a kitchen machine. Next, add a coarsely chopped medium onion, 3 large cloves of minced garlic, and what can only really be adequately described as a big bunch of fresh parsley, stalks and all. Add in a teaspoon of salt and a good pinch of pepper, and spice up with a teaspoon of curry powder, a teaspoon of coriander powder, and a generous teaspoon of cumin powder, and a half a teaspoon of baking soda, which will help give a better crunch to the final product, a tablespoon of lemon juice to cut through the earthy flavours, and an optional tablespoon or two of a neutral oil for a more indulgent mouthfeel. And that is almost that, so we can blend thoroughly now, slowly at first and then a little more passionately, and my magic ingredient still has to be added to what will eventually be a relatively finely blended mix. And look, I'm not keeping the magical secret ingredient from you on purpose to drive engagement. It does just genuinely go in at the end. And I'm just stirring it here because the mix does try and escape from your bowl, and then I'm going to blend it again. And if the contents stubbornly continue their pursuit for freedom, you will have to give the bowl a bit of a thrashing and a shaking to quell the militant uprising. And once the doomed Garbanzo rebellion has been successfully and brutally quashed, you can then decant the whole thing into a large bowl, perhaps a little bigger than you think you'll need, and what you'll find in there at this stage is a number of disparate ingredients with no cohesion, a bit of a ragtag bunch with no collective consensus, which I am demonstrating here. So this recipe either needs a populist demagogue or a binder, and this is where things get interesting. My magic falafel ingredient is 20 grams of linseed, which will need to be ground into a fine powder in a blender, or I'm using a coffee grinder. And look, I'm loath to upload a recipe that requires a few tools that you might not have in your kitchen, but most falafel recipes use flour as a binder, which makes the falafel mealy and dry in my opinion. If you want to make this recipe with flour as a binder, add around 40 to 50 grams of flour to the mix and test fry one piece first to make sure you have the right consistency. And ground linseed might not seem a very magical ingredient, but here is where the alchemy occurs. I added 75 millilitres of boiling water to the ground linseed, or flaxseed for my friends across the pond, and as I stir vigorously, something wonderful happens, but it doesn't sound too wonderful when it's described because there's a type of soluble fibre in linseed called mucilage that absorbs the water and swells to create this gelatinous concoction, which I'm just going to add into my mix now, and I'm going to blend it all together with my hands. And my older brother called me a Tory when he spotted linseed in my cupboard and went on to suggest that I was Jacob Rees-Mogg's simp. But you know, he does have a history of offensive comments relating to my food preferences, as I've mentioned before on my channel, calling me pretentious and not speaking to me for 2 weeks for owning a garlic press, and calling me a bottoming homosexual for eating quiche. I didn't even know what a bottoming homosexual was. I had to look it up. I like to cover and chill my falafel mix for about an hour before forming. You can see that it holds together very well now. And because we added the linseed gloop instead of flour, the inside of the falafel will be much more moist and creamy rather than dry and mealy. So there are 2 ways to form the falafel depending on how you want to cook them. For deep frying, you can make balls, which you'll see a lot, but I like to squeeze the mix in my hand to create like a gnarly, knobbly exterior, which will crisp up and give a much better crunch to the finished falafel. But it's up to you. And for shallow frying, you want to make a disc shape so you get an even fry, but you could also deep fry the disc shape too if you like disc shaped food. And I'm just putting these on a baking sheet here lined with baking paper because I like to freeze them first, especially if I'm deep frying them, because this way you just get a lot less detritus in your pan at the end because the freezing helps maintain the falafel's structural integrity. So let's shallow fry first with the frozen discs in a hot pan with a generous amount of oil You want to cook these for 3 to 4 minutes aside, and once they're in the pan, try not to fanny about too much with them aside from checking that they're not browning too quickly. And after 3 to 4 minutes, they should have a lovely golden colour and can be flipped very carefully and given another 3 to 4 minutes on the other side. And I tend to cook for 3 minutes per side and then flip again and give the first cooked side maybe another minute or so just to make sure that they're as crispy as they can be before turning onto a plate covered with plenty of kitchen paper to drain a little before serving. But I have to say, I do prefer the deep fried version, which should be cooked for around 7 minutes in oil set to 170 Celsius or so. That's 350 Fahrenheit. And I love the deep fried version, partly because deep frying is just generally awesome, partly because it pisses my doctor off because he's kind of a weird fella who won't look me in the eye properly, and also because of that spiky shape that provides a lovely crisp coating in all those nooks and crannies. And I just want to cover my ass a little bit here and just say, look, if you're going to freestyle your deep frying like I'm doing here, please don't fill your pan more than halfway. I'm serving up on a paratha flatbread slathered with tzatziki. Links in the description for these gems, and do check out those paratha if you're looking for a sensational bread to enjoy with these falafel. I've augmented this lot with a little bit of rabbit food and some red onion. Put the lovely crispy falafel on there, still sizzling from the pan. Some of my 2-minute garlic sauce, link below for that. And some of my 2-minute chili sauce, link below for that, of course. And it's amazing what you can achieve with a few simple ingredients if you're unperturbed by the mockery of an older sibling. Because after making this falafel dozens of times over the years, you have my personal guarantee that these falafel are the best you'll ever eat, while being politically acceptable in mixed company. I'll see you next time, eh?